We see the world through our different worldviews, culturally, personally, familially. We each have our story. So when we look at those mental gymnastics, why won't people change and what can we do about it? We ask that question is why, and I think a lot of explanations of why people don't change, they're all relevant and all important. But I think we're missing this existential meaning making, is people are holding on to something very concrete in a world that is changing. But we have to accept that change is inevitable. We go, oh, I can accept it. We can change jobs and homes and circumstances. But that we hold on rigidly to traditions and habits that make us think, well, at least we can get together for Thanksgiving. Our culture's still intact, our Christmases or whatever. These are just artifacts of something we're trying to hold on to. It's very painful for us not to. And so I think we're holding on, we're trying to avoid an anxiety of massive change.
Hi, I'm Carol Saunders, host of the Spiritual Forum, where I have extraordinary conversations exploring the vast realms of spiritual living. If you're on a healing, learning, awakening, or intertransformational journey, this podcast will support you. The personal stories, wisdom, and insight shared here will inspire you and give you hope. Step into your divine nature and welcome to the forum. Welcome, everyone, to the Spiritual Forum. I'm so glad you're here. Let me introduce my guest, who is the infamous Clare Mann. She is an organizational psychologist, a university lecturer, best-selling author, and existential psychotherapist with extensive international experience facilitating individuals and organizations to create extraordinary results. Her main focus has been on communication, leadership, executive coaching, organizational development, and work-life integration. Currently, she works as a vegan psychologist and communication skills trainer, helping vegans navigate our current world and become calm, confident, and influential communicators. Her books include Vystopia, The Anguish of Being Vegan in a Non-Vegan World, and the follow-up book, Myths of Choice, Why People Won't Change and What You Can Do About It. Today, we're going to be focusing on Myths of Choice, which I believe is a book for anyone who is in any kind of awakening process. Welcome, Clare.
Thank you. And thank you for that long list. Gosh, I've been around a few decades, it would seem. I feel a little tired. Whew.
I know, I know those intros are like, wow, did I do all that?
It's normally only my mum and dad.
Well, I'm really glad to have you. I'm going to start with some rapid fire questions so that we can get to know you kind of a little differently and quickly. And then we'll move on to your story. So I'm wondering if you have any set of words or phrase that you live by that you might consider a mantra.
Well, you just used the word mantra, and I often teach my students to have a daily mantra. So they train themselves as soon as they come into awareness, as they wake up. And as soon as I wake up, I hear, what a grand and glorious day filled with love, opportunity, and potential. And then somewhere in the house, a dog will start tapping their tail and get all excited because the day's beginning. So that sets me up. Of course, those words have a different cortical arousal on the brain, and it sets me up for the day, whatever time it is.
I love that. What a wonderful way to start the day. That's perfect. All right. This one should be easy, but I actually find this one hard. What would be a favorite animal?
Would be it's very, very hard. It should be easy.
I
Gosh,
know.
how do we choose? Um, oh my goodness me. As you're saying this, and I love this when anyone has a conversation, we have images and associations, don't we? Immediately a pig came into my awareness because, and we'll, in my story, perhaps we'll talk about that more, these beautiful sentient creatures. But I'm going to say squirrel, because I was taken back into the south of England, where I come from, when we had red squirrels in the late 1960s, I would say. And I can see this little beautiful squirrel as my sister's on her paper round at very early hours in the freezing cold of England, running up a tree. So I think the squirrel has come into today.
Yeah, I think it's fine to have a favorite animal every day.
Oh, there you go. That's a good question.
What is today's favorite animal? Okay, so
Yep,
succinctly, if you were
exactly.
in an elevator and just had a few moments, I mean, to share what your message is to the world, like this is it. What is Clare Mann's message to the world?
My message to the world. That's a much better question than what do you do in the elevator and that sort of thing. Say what you do. My message to the world is that we are basically good. We have lost our path. I think we are hardwired for empathy and loving kindness. And we need to stop submitting to our superstition of authority, that someone needs to govern us. We will run amok if we don't. We are the ones we've been waiting for, and we need to really step up into our personal leadership.
That's a powerful message. It's a good one, and it's very important for our times. Okay, so now let's talk about what took you from organizational psychologist to the work that you're doing today and writing about Vystopia and myths of choice.
Well, I'll give you the abridged version. I actually left school when I was 16. It took me a little while to get back to realize I was interested in the human condition. And that study of psychology took me into the masculine grown-up world of organizational psychology. I was a little more animus dominated in my early 20s, and I wanted to go into a man's world. You know, I could do this. Very traditional parents, wonderful parents, actually. And so I trained as an organizational psychologist, and I found myself in corporations, small to medium-sized businesses, mainly on the larger side. So doing things like culture change, rolling out graduate training schemes, looking at team building, this sort of thing. Obviously, it took me a little while to move into that area, but I a lot of extensive experience. And what invariably happened, I would be called in, and the senior person at that time, back in the 90s, usually male, would say, "I'm so glad I've got you here, Claire, because I know we're doing this great big grown-up project, but my life is falling apart. I don't know who I am. My children don't respect me. I can't bear going on holiday because I don't trust people. Who am I without my job? I need your help." And I realized at that point, I they were asking me to take them on a journey that I was ill-equipped to prepare to give them, really, or take them on. And so I decided, through a circuitous route, sitting on a beach in Israel at the time. I was working over there with the, dare I say, the military and the school system, in a teaching capacity from a university, another story. And so I was reading a book by Sebastian Faulks and he was talking about who will remember me after I die. And as I was reading that, he said, well, my children will. My grandchildren may know my middle name, but as it goes beyond, it was great granddad or whatever. And I suddenly went, oh my gosh. I realized I was a little existential person, always had been. And so I went back to London. I signed up for another master's degree in existential psychotherapy and counseling. And I retrained. And so that led me down a path of doing a bit of each of the work to start, and working one-to-one with people, really far more of seeing the best in people, helping people to truly make meaning and to take responsibility for their lives and step up. So that sort of moved me from that organizational psychology to more psychotherapy. And then I'm, moving along, working in London, then in Sydney and Auckland and different places I've lived. But I had been vegetarian actually from the age of 17, after seeing something, reading about what was happening in a slaughterhouse, and I just didn't want to be part of it. But living in New Zealand, being a psychotherapist in different places, I came across, and I'll tell my story later, but I basically became vegan 18 years ago. And so I suddenly realized the courses I was running, the leadership and communication at the time, my own programs publicly, I didn't want to train people to ask their boss for more money or to have a more senior position. I thought these are the skills, the communication, the leadership, the mindset. These are the skills that we can use to create a better world, not to make more money or build a corporation that's going to trash the environment or people or animals, or I want to do this. And so it must be about 15 years ago, I started calling myself a vegan psychologist. And so I am a vegan, and we'll clarify what that is because it's not a fussy diet. But also I help vegans and animal protection groups around the world really share the message that we have all chosen to forget, actually, our birthright of loving kindness. So that takes me to where I am today, I guess.
Yeah, I love that story. I love that story. You moved from the corporate world and actually did some really good work there, but then looked at how can I make this matter more? And I really think that's part of the spiritual path. It's part of like discerning who we are and and authentically. You said a few times that we are you believe that we are authentically compassionate and caring people. I do too. I think it's a very different philosophy than other schools of thought, which believe that we're, sinful or there's just something wrong with us. I think we've just gotten confused about our identity in a large way, and that our culture really supports that. And so we just keep repeating the same thing over and over again. And so you've taken your skill set and moving it now in a way so that you will be remembered. I just love that. I love that. So you said that you want to define vegan. Why don't we do that so that people can get clear on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm in a nice position to define it because apparently I became a vegan before I knew I was one. Somebody had to tell me. And my husband and I were living in New Zealand, and we came across some heinous treatment of animals from what's called pig dogging, which is the cruel practice of taking dogs out who are starved after many days, and they go hunting for pigs. So I'm finding baby pigs frozen overnight because mum's been killed. I then came across the dairy industry and realized that baby calves were taken away from their mothers so that we can have our lattes, things that I not agree with, but this is all hidden from plain sight and the most brutal treatment of these animals. So when we came back to Australia, my partner said, this can't just be New Zealand. And so he did some research and he said, I'm sorry, we've got to sit down and watch this. We'd only been back in the country a few weeks, really. And we saw earthlings, we saw meat your meat, we saw crimes of silence, which is to do with vivisection. And we all became vegan on the spot, but we didn't know it. We just knew that we did not want to eat, wear, partake of, even though we were both vegetarian. I'd been vegetarian for 30 years. So I thought I was doing the right thing. I couldn't believe how I'd been lied to. And so we said, well, we're not going to eat eggs or cheese or honey because it's wrong. And also we're taking all this negativity and grief and pain into our bodies, which I think is reflected in our society. We are, the outer is the inner, where we take energy in, it's coming out. And then we looked at each other and said, are we going to die? Because we didn't know anyone else that was giving up all these things. Being a vegetarian in the 70s, of course, that was crazy enough. And I was always the crazy person. But the long and the short of it is, I've had different definitions over these years. Somebody told me at that early stage, oh, you've become vegan. And I said, well, what's a vegan? And they basically said, well, it's someone who does everything to not use or exploit animals. And whilst I held on to that definition, I'd like to give the one that sits well with me, is because I think it reminds us of what we've chosen to forget. Dr. Will Tuttle, who wrote the World Peace Diet, uses the definition that it is a philosophy of loving kindness towards ourselves as human animals, towards other people who are not yet vegans, who are perhaps trashing the world, who are our loved ones who behaved badly, the people that we might label as evil. It's loving kindness of their potential, not their behavior, saying it's okay. It's loving kindness towards all animals, not just our companion ones or the exotic ones, the pigs, the chickens, the cockroaches, the frogs, all of them, and then all ecosystems. So I see this, that would be my definition of veganism. And a part of that, of course, is that we don't eat or wear animals, because that is one of the biggest areas that we use fellow sentient beings on this planet, because we have chosen. And I think we can talk religious beliefs and philosophies if we like, is we have duped ourselves and we choose to be duped. That actually all principles of spiritual and religious belief is to not cause harm. And we do our lovely mental gymnastics to get around it. And the more I educate myself on this, the more I realize is that it serves a purpose to that of powers that shouldn't be. But each of us, we can change our own world and not be part of a world that is destructive. Mm.
Yeah, the mental gymnastics part is interesting. Humans do that on so many levels, on so many topics. Whether we look at like war, or we look at what our nation is doing, how we feel about other people, how we respond when people are different from us. The whole animal thing. It's like there's the mental gymnastics we go through to justify something that is contrary to us being loving beings of loving kindness. It should just exhaust us. Sometimes I wonder if that's like not at the root of aging, like we're aging so much because we're not really being who we are, and how much work it takes to prop up something that we're not. Now, I think that there are a lot of people who would say that's not me. Animals are here to be used, and this is what we've been taught, and it's just it's a cultural conditioning. I don't think it's natural
Yes.
either, but, grandpa taught my dad taught me, I teach my son teaches his son. Same thing with the female lineage, and then we decide that that's okay. Humans change really quickly just in a couple generations. So that's one of the things we do, and then the other thing we do is we just don't wanna change, which is really the topic of myths of choice.
Well, I'd like to comment on what you've just said there because I trained as generally as a psychologist, then organizational, which has a view of the human condition, which I realized I didn't share because I don't think we're full of, you know, attributes and abilities and, information in and information out. I think we're far more meaning making. We have
Mhm.
this monopoly on the truth apparently these days called science. It's actually not, it's scientism. Is actually a dread belief that unless we can prove it, we've taken out our spiritual essence really. The reason I studied existential psychotherapy, because it had this huge level of passion and meaning making. Who are we? How do I be anchored in the world? And we see the world through our different worldviews, culturally, personally, familially. We each have our story. And I suppose that's what I like about it. So when we look at those mental gymnastics, why won't people change and what can we do about it? We ask that question is why, and I think a lot of explanations of why people don't change, they're all relevant and all important. But I think we're missing this existential meaning making is people are holding on to something very concrete in a world that is changing. But we have to accept that change is inevitable. We go, oh, I can accept it. We can change jobs and homes and circumstances. But that we hold on rigidly to traditions and habits that make us think, well, at least we can get together for Thanksgiving. Our culture's still intact, our Christmases or whatever. You know, these are just artifacts of something we're trying to hold on to. It's very painful for us not to. And so I think we're holding on, we're trying to avoid an anxiety of massive change, different worldview. Um, but we can't solve the problems we've got with the same level of thinking that we have actually created. So we need to get uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. We live in a world that I think naturally makes us anxious. There's just so much there's chaos, there's change constantly. Most people just don't really like change, and it's so they're looking for something, one thing they can hold on to, something that they can hold on to. It's often the family meal or the family gathering or the restaurant they go to, or just the habits that we live day in and day out, and it gives us some sense of safety when life has never been safe, never will be safe.
No,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
you're right there.
So here we are in the world, and the world is a mess, and it's been a mess for eons. And and the question is, will it continue to be a mess? And what can we do to become closer to what you and I both think we were created to be? And so this idea of identifying the myths that we use, or the reasons that we can't change, that you've identified like 8 of them in your book. And I love that you've identified them, because as you were going through them, I'm like, "Yep, yep, yep, yep." I could see myself in like almost everyone, not all of them, almost everyone. And I think almost everybody wants to see, while they don't like change, I think they want to see the world change into some idea that's better than what it is. And I think almost everybody also has people that are resistant to change in their life. And then almost everybody also is resistant to change. So that's why I think your book, Myths of Choice, is really for everyone. I don't think it's just for those who identify currently as vegans, although there are more vegans in the world who know it. Like you said, they're all in the waiting room.
And they'll say what every vegan has ever said. Oh my gosh, how didn't I see this?
Yeah.
And also, I wish I knew then what I know now. I would have been vegan on the spot. And also, why didn't you tell me how this isn't hardship. This is, I've never felt such peace because there's alignment in my espoused values and my actions. It's so simple, even though I resisted it and I came out of my head, I came into my heart and went, oh my gosh, let's live lightly on this planet. We can live healthy and happy lives without harming others. So why wouldn't we?
Right.
So
I
simple.
know. I know. Um,
Mm.
it's so interesting. I really identify that why didn't I know this sooner? Because I became vegetarian at 15, age 15, and I didn't know a vegetarian for decades. Honestly, I didn't know anybody else as a vegetarian. I think the first person I
I
met
know.
was I was when I was way out of college, way out of working for 20 years. I mean, I felt like I was the only one on the planet. I knew there were others out there, but I didn't know who they were because I wasn't really plugged in. And all that time, I I did not realize the cruelty in the dairy and egg industry. I just didn't know. I thought I was doing great stuff, and I just didn't know that it was actually probably worse than if I had been eating meat all that time. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Our journeys have therefore been the same, and I think it's women. How do we think people produce milk? And if we can be duped and we have bodies, we have to be pregnant. It's simple. So we don't get pregnant and then just produce milk for the next 10 years. It will dry up, And so the constant impregnation of mother cows, well above what they should be doing, and then the stealing and the grief and the pain, and then in many countries, the immediate blood. And I don't mean do this to alarm people, but I wish people had told me, and I'm sure you wish they had told you, because we don't want to be part of this. And once we know, we don't have to do it ourselves, but we are financing this. And you know, this is something we can do something about. I think this is it, in terms of putting a positivity and a loving kindness into the world. And it's so easy. And it's so unnatural to drink the reproductive secretion of another animal. It's crazy.
It is.
I
It's
don't want to,
totally insane.
you wouldn't want the woman next door's milk. Why the heck are we getting a bovine? Hidden from view. We don't even know the conditions. And I tell you, if people really knew what was in it, and the fact that it's bleached, it's pink. Milk is pink because it's such a brutal process. It's got blood in it. This is not good for us, guys and girls.
I know, I
Mm.
know. We our the U.S. just issued some new food pyramid. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yes, we've seen it, and it's almost to be expected, isn't it? And it's almost laughable. And I hope the public are going to wake up and go, "Well, just a minute. It's it's we've got to prop up the business like we had to after the Second World War, which is where the first food pyramid came from, is to produce the industries." And I'm looking around, and people aren't. Oh no, but it's sugar. It's processed food. It's
It's
my
always
goodness.
something else. And
It's
now we got to drink whole milk, all fat milk, all fat. That's what we need is all fat. It's okay.
it's
Okay.
laughable when I look at these buffoons, these nitwits, as I call them, pictures of health and vitality. Yes, I don't think so.
Well, it's so interesting to get down to ask the fundamental question. So the people in charge there are looking at all these little questions like, is it fat? Is it sugar? Is it this? Is it that? And no one's looking at fundamentally what is milk? What is it? And that's what you just explained. Fundamentally, what is it? It is the secretions of another species mother who has a baby who it's made for. So why on earth are
Yes,
we doing it? No one asked that question. No one's asking that
no
question.
one else.
And I didn't ask it for a
Yeah.
long time.
No, because the power, they literally, it's somebody's working hard for us not to see it. Me too.
Yeah.
Why didn't I ask? Well, is there anything else? And this is this whole thing of what else don't I know? And that's uncomfortable. There's the existential angst. But I would just say the people in power, they're only in power because we vote, actually. You're going to get it really political on this one, because I actually think that's our biggest mistake, is we think we need to be governed. But that's a whole paradigm shift. But they're not sitting there worrying about the proteins and the things. They have been tasked, let's be honest, they're pretty transparent these days. They've been tasked with the fact that we've got to boost the economy. And so how are we going to do that? We're going to help the cattle industry. We're going to help the meat and dairy industry. Nothing to do with people's health. You just have to look around since the 1950s, how people's bodies have changed. And now we have to have full cream milk, even though all the research is there. All the research is on dairy. Just have to read the China study, it's the biggest study of nutrition ever conducted, never possible to conduct because it was in China before migration. So it's open. So it's a wonderful thing that if we have this information, is to invite people to go, well, just a minute. Do we trust the people that are lying to us about everything else and taking us to war, causing destruction, and actually, behaviors that are really despotic, really? Do we trust these people to tell us how to feed our children? I'm not sure about that one.
I think that gets back to the question of like, what is a spiritual path? I'm going to bring this back to spirituality because to me, ultimately, each one of us is our own authority. Ultimately, when we are fully spiritually actualized, sorry, when we know our divine truth, when we are in alignment with who we are originally created to be, then we also have the discernment. We also know what to do. We also know what is the right thing for us. And we don't need to project that onto some sort of authority figure. I know a lot of people who are spiritual people, they think, well, ultimately we're going to have this really good government. I'm like, no, ultimately we're not going to have a
Yeah,
government. Ultimately, there
that's
is no
exactly.
government. We are governing bodies ourselves, and we will
Yeah,
be connected in a way that we know what is right for each of us and what is right for all of us. And so that to me is the spiritual path. Also, just really questioning all of the paradigms, all of the training, all of the stuff that we've learned, the conditioning. Everything, almost everything we've learned from the day we're born is conditioning. And so to me, that is so much a spiritual path, questioning everything that we do and the patterns that we're stuck in to really discern, is that right for me or not? Is that aligned with who I am or not? So for anybody out there thinking this is just a talk on veganism, this is a talk on the spiritual path as far as I'm
oh,
concerned.
yes. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that kind of moves us into the myths of choice. And I always use a wonderful example, um, because you're talking about, our authority. And often existentialism, the study of the philosophical approach of what is it to exist, to be? What is this thing called being? Essence of life. And there's no shortage of interpretations, but we're still left with that, yes, who am I? But what is this really all about? And sometimes I think we rush to find that and say, oh, that's what it's about. It assuages our anxiety. But when we truly, really, I think the existential journey is to ask, where do we have choice? We deny we have it, or we can't see that it's available. Choosing actions and mindsets. Are we duping ourselves and saying, oh, I've come to my truth and I really can feel intuitively what's right? And are we doing that? And a lovely example I like to use is when my both my parents have passed now, and they were wonderful teachers, extraordinary teachers. Taught, I could tell you so much about them. I will if you ask me. But when I was a child, my mum used to say to my dad, my mother used to say to my father, Vic, would you like tea or coffee? And he'd say, I'd like the same as you, dear. So anybody who has parents of a vintage or a listing of a vintage will understand that one. Vic, would you like tea or coffee? I'll have the same as you. Well, what? No, I'll have the same as you. I mean, I'm easy, Gabrielle. And she said, well, actually, you're not, because you're asking me to choose. They have a little battle. She'd choose coffee and he wish he had tea. it was 8 o'clock in the morning and she'd be a bit naughty and say, well, I'm having a gin and tonic, which of course she wasn't. And he'd say, you're just being sorry. And it was a family story. But there was that one moment when I looked up and my father said to my mother on this very regular occasion, look, Gabrielle, I'm not going to choose. And I was only 8 years, 6, 7 or 8. And I thought, he's not choosing. He's choosing not to choose. And I had that moment. Now, luckily, my parents, I used to have long philosophical conversations with both of them. I talked to my mother about that, and I realized I was a little existential being with that perspective of we choose, not choosing is a choice. So if we go along with and say it'll be as it is and whatever, we are choosing not to choose. So where are we denying we have responsibility actually for what everything that happens to us actually? If you ever notice when we got a problem, we're always there. So I like that little story, and it always makes me smile, and I've written articles about it because it's a funny family story.
Well, it's a very, very good story. It's very meaningful and it's very applicable to almost
Yeah.
everyone's life. We think we're
Yes.
not choosing and we are choosing. We think that I don't really care, but you're choosing not to choose. You're either choosing to choose or you're choosing not to choose. Either way, you're
Yeah.
choosing.
Or we think we're choosing, but from a very narrow diet of choices. Because as we
Yeah.
look around our world, in sheer probability terms, why is everybody doing the same thing?
Yeah.
Traditionally, and we know this is it's culture, because culture to some extent is it makes us feel grounded, and there's a where we plant ourselves, I guess. But it would also be a denial of responsibility. Well, I'm just Italian. This we've always eaten this, we've always done this, we always wear this, we always marry a person of our same faith or whatever. But I think we relinquish our responsibility. Oh, I'm a woman, I'm a man, I'm a psychologist, it's my culture, it's my hormones, oh, it's my mental illness, and I'm not saying we don't struggle and suffer, but actually, once we label it as something else, we've washed our hands of it.
Hmm.
It's I was born in sin, we might say, and therefore I'm doomed to be this. Are we really, or is that us relinquishing our part in what we can do to, and add our part to the world? So
Yeah, I love the
yeah,
the excuse, I would say, that we've always done it this way. It's like you hear that all the time. Humans have always been this way. We've always been this way. Okay, what does that have to do with anything? It has nothing to do with anything, honestly. What do we want to be
yeah,
now, and who do we want to be going forward? There's
exactly.
this thing about,
I think
well, humans are designed that we've always been this way. It's never going to change. What's never going to change as long as we choose to stay the way we've always been.
yes. That's right. But it's almost a way to assuage anxiety, isn't it? Is like, well, really, what is that? Well, we're saying that when we say something like that, we feel powerless. We don't know what to do. The problem's too big. And as Gandhi said, if you think something small can't make a difference, then try going to bed with a mosquito tonight. So very true. So, I think we're all a rising tide raises all boats. So each of us have to play our part, I think. And how can we change our world? If we want a healthier, kinder, more abundant, um, refreshing, intelligent, open minded world, let's begin by donating an intelligent, abundant, kind, healthy individual to the world ourselves, because that is something we can do something about. Doesn't matter we're getting deliberately pulled, as we know, through your politics and our politics here. I call them the predator class and the powers that shouldn't exist because they don't reflect anything of what the average person
Mhm.
or any person, most people want. But we have this slavish adherence that someone has to govern us. It's actually
Mm.
not true. And this is one of the biggest myths, of course, is when we start to, change, see what we can do, we can start to say, I can't worry about all these. I am concerned as a human being generally for what's happening in the world. But if I give my energies and I start posting flags and doing everything else on social media, that just might make me feel a bit better in my armchair for a moment. But what can I do?
What's happening? But
My neighbor, where's my community? How can I spread loving kindness and boundaries, of course, and accountability? But how can I do that? Because if we each do that in our worlds, we collectively look around us and we've created something very different.
I mean, it's the one thing we can do. I was walking the track this morning with an older man. Well, I could say older, older than I am, but anymore, what does that mean? So anyway, we were talking. He started to get into politics, and uh, he, I'm like, I like to stay on the outside of of politics. You know, it's not where I want to go with people. And ultimately, we kind of talked about sharing kind of what you're talking about. It's like I told him my idea is no authority, no government, and and yes, we're in this mess. All right. I said, but you know, the one thing I try to do, I said, Fred, all I can do is make this day as joyful as possible and matter as much as possible. And I would add also to be living loving kindness and connection as much as possible. That's the one thing I can do. And that's the one thing I'm committed to doing every single day. And it does matter. It matters. It creates my world. And it also, I think, it impacts the consciousness of the collective, whether they feel it or not, and especially if more of us do that, it will shift. And then the
Yes.
consciousness actually will kind of form a different way of living here, I believe. And so we can get overwhelmed with there's too much, it's overwhelming, it's always been this way, I can't do anything about it. But you can make that choice to live your own life in alignment with your values and to live your own life in compassion for
Yeah.
all. So so we're gonna get back. We're gonna get back into your book now. Because I want to go through some of these myths that you say why people won't change. Why people won't change. I'm just gonna list the 8 myths that I read in your book, and I think we should go through some of these or all of them if you want to. The first one is identity. The second one's selfishness. The third one is the myth of the group, which I think is very common. The fourth is the myth of commitment. The fifth is the myth of certainty. The sixth is morality. The seventh is dishonesty. And the eighth is that last one that the idea that you can't change. Can we dig into just a few of these? Because I think some of these are really, I think they're common to everybody. But the ones
Yeah.
that really stick out to me are identity and group
Yeah.
and like the myth that we can't change.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I'm going to remind myself just the actual definition to help us, unless you have it in front of you. But yeah, I think I do. Well, it's
Yeah, I
interesting.
wrote some of it down.
Okay.
Identity was being someone who you're not and trying to fit into others' expectations.
Absolutely. So I think the easiest way to think about a myth is an unquestioned assumption.
Yeah.
That makes it so simple because we're not talking about, Greek mythology here. We're talking about an unquestioned assumption. So the identity myth is the unquestioned assumption that you're not good enough as you are, and that fitting in with others' expectations will bring you happiness. That's the identity myth. So, and if we look around our world, of course, people are often using others as markers. Am I successful enough? Am I where I should be in life? Do I earn enough? Am I beautiful enough? Am I, known enough? Um, People want to be significant, but in not necessarily in ways that make a difference in the world. Sometimes it would seem. So that identity myth is that we're constantly looking to others as yardsticks, and that's why we have this sort of collective shift towards certain behaviors. And we think, gosh, what's happened to our world? Because collectively, this makes the world. And I would like to dispel that myth because um, we need to go the path less traveled. We need to find out, why are we here? Um, who was it? And I know sort of metaphors and quotes are us today, but it's who said the most important 2 days of your life moments is what the moment you were born and the moment when you find out why you were born.
Mm.
And that can happen early or later in life. It can happen at 95. And once you know that, I think it's like a remembering, an awakening that goes to yes, and everything else is no. And so the identity method, we constantly look to others. Now, in our earlier years, of course, we're trying to find out, I guess who we are. We're trying out different groups and different types of things to do or interests and things. We're getting to see what fits. And I think a lot of the anxiety comes when people relinquish responsibility for who they should be and they look to others. What should I look like? What should I do? How should I speak? Could I speak my truth? You know, Gender differences, all sorts of funny things. Is once we realize that that isn't the case, and that we We need to take responsibility for who we are, what we think, how we act every time we open our mouths. I think we can be liberated. Mm.
Yeah, that I could see a lot of people are get stuck there, that I can't make choices other than fitting into the culture, fitting into the expectations of what success or beauty looks like, that I can't make another choice. I've gotta choose, what is expected of me, whether that's your parents or whether it's your group. A group would be the next one. What group is do you wanna go through all 8, or do we want me to just
We could give a flavor to them, I guess, because it's and if it resonates with people, the group myth. That's here we go. Yep, over to
group
you.
is actually the 3rd one, selfishness is the 2nd one, but, uh, let's do
Yeah,
group.
okay. Well, if you yes, a group. It is better to be part of a group than be an individual. Now, a lot of people say, "Oh no, no, I'm individual. I don't go along with the group." But actually, it's a hidden group. We all are now. I don't like animal definitions often because most of them in our world are derogatory, but it's almost that we're all sheep, but we're in different flocks. Because people are derogatory towards sheep. They're incredibly bright, able animals. It's just the fact that they just that we don't perhaps we don't like it because it's everything is a reflection back of ourselves. And we go, oh, I'm going along with, as opposed to them keeping in a nice group as companionship. But basically it means that we say we're not in groups we don't go along with, but let's look at some group ideology. How is it that everybody tends to traditionally, I know we have some variations, but on the whole, most people grow up, they look for a career or a job, they find a partner, they have children, they work all their lives, probably in a job they don't like, to buy a block of concrete called a house and a bit of metal called a car, because, well, that's just what you do. And then they go and see their family every other weekend because that's what you do. That's what you do with your mother-in-law. And then we have to look after our children. We have to save for them because financially they now can't do their own. Oh, you have to do it. What choice do I have? That's what being a parent is. That's what being a wife is, a husband, a pastor, a citizen. We're giving into group ideologies of what it is to be something. Everybody knows that parents do this. Well, I've been a psychologist long enough to know that there's huge variation in parenting, and a lot of people are not good parents. But archetypally, we have notions of parenting and mothering and those sort of things. And I would say, on the whole, most people really doing their best. But these are the group myths. So they're groupings as much as anything that actually we deny we have choice. Oh no, I can choose my own career. I could choose my own partner. I could choose to leave my husband if I wanted to. But actually, what keeps us there? And if you've ever noticed, when somebody makes a change, they emigrate, they go through a divorce, they put their foot down with their child who's on drugs and say, no, you can't come into the house. I'll help you, but you can't come. Other people become uncomfortable sometimes because maybe they've denied that they could ever do that. You can't do that. I could never leave my husband. You can't. I believe in the sanctity of marriage, and marriage is for life. I'm not saying this is a good or bad thing, but it's the belief. I could never deny my children, even if they were murderers. Then someone else does it. Then someone else
Mhm.
changes career or sells up and becomes a monk. And they can't deny it's not possible. So there's the existential anxiety. I know it's possible, and therefore I'm not doing it. I can't say it's because I can't do it. It's because I'm choosing not to do it. But there is the anxiety, but it's also the liberation. Because once we take full responsibility for what we're doing or we're not doing, then we are grounded in the world and we can choose more meaningfully, I think, by actually challenging the group myth.
Yeah, the group thing is so big because we're really wired to be social animals, and we're very social, and we want to be a part of a group, generally speaking. Is this also though where the people, when they're introduced to the idea of not eating animals, for example, or not exploiting animals, it's like, well, I can't do that because that's not what my family does, or I can't be the only one in my family that does that.
Yeah,
I can't hold that
yeah,
space. I get that from a lot of people, that I can't do that. My
yeah,
husband won't do it, so I can't do it. And that pull to just align with the group versus just kinda stand on your own. Even I've even seen people whose values are completely aligned, but they can't do it because of this group pull.
Yeah. And there's a cost to that. There's what we call existential guilt, that you know that your choices are out of alignment with who you are and want to be and what you think is right, and yet you're not doing it. Now, presumably, because the pain of knowing about the reason you've chosen, to eat animals, or if you choose that, is less than actually the being excluded from the group. The
Mhm.
I won't fit in. And families particularly use wonderful strategies to try and moderate behavior, of course. The cold shoulder, the exclusion from the group, the pained face of your mother, or something like that. How can you do this to me? Why do you spoil everything? Why we've always done Thanksgiving, or whatever. So there's this enormous power, and it doesn't mean that we don't want to get together for Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever we choose to be part of. Um, but it's just the fact that we just have to change some of the ingredients. But I think if people are not choosing the person who tries to blame the other, it's it's saying, well, no, we can't do this unless we have our tradition. And I think this is it. I recently in one of the classes I was teaching, someone had said they've been vegan 35 years, and they just took non-animal food to Christmas dinner. And the brother-in-law actually took his own, he even roasted his own potatoes. This is how I want it cooked, because this is what we do every year. Now, that is someone who's really stuck in a fixed reality. And I don't know his journey, but presumably that is an attempt to try to hold on to something solid. He might have had major losses in his life, and he's trying to hold on. So I'm not blaming this guy. It's not. And I think once we start to look, it's not just somebody being selfish. Aren't people selfish? They just tell me what to do. Why can't you accept me? I think it's much deeper than that.
Mhm,
It
mhm.
is our basic anchoring in the world. And yet within every problem is the seed of its solution. And so the
Mhm.
very thing we fear is often behind it, and within it is the very thing that needs to change. Imagine looking at your family and going, do you know something? I'd love to come to Thanksgiving, have a great time, but um, I'm not going to eat this, or I'm not going to prepare this, or I'm not going to be in the presence of this. Because really, Thanksgiving is about us getting together and being grateful and those sort of things. And I think it should be, other living beings should be also grateful and be given the opportunity. Imagine saying that, because that's truth, if that's what that person is at. Um, Rather than hiding behind and resenting, because I think when we truly come into our power, if we don't come into our power, we reduce the spiritual possibilities for ourselves and for other people.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and I think you made some good points there. We're not talking about throwing Thanksgiving out or throwing out traditions. Traditions are important to humans. They're important. It is important that we have traditions. It's the stuckness on exactly how it should look. I think that we get stuck on it needs to be like this because it's always been like this. Don't throw out the tradition, but maybe question how we go about this tradition. What is underneath this tradition? Like you said, we're here to be
Yes,
together and to connect and to be thankful. We
that's right.
forget that all the time.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. So if that's our liberation. Because if we can't do it over a Thanksgiving dinner, how are we going to enact the sort of changes we want to see in the world?
Right.
Because it gives us good practice to align our own. We've got to get our own house in order before the problems aren't out there. They're really within us in many ways.
Absolutely.
Um,
Again, that's the spiritual
People
path.
are,
It's all
oh,
here.
yeah, can you believe it, what Donald Trump's done? And I say to people, have you met this guy? No. And where did you watch this? Oh, well, I watched it on the media. Do you mean the media that's controlled by six major corporations? So is it possible they're not quite telling us the truth? It's worse or it's better, I don't know. But what can you do about it other than getting upset? So what can you do today when, I think this is another spiritual thing, is when someone behaves badly and we rage at that or we're upset, that's where we stop often. I see it as when someone does that, they have the capacity to bring out a rage within us, a just rage that actually says, something's wrong here and I have to do something about it. That sort of awakening, they bring forth, and they bring forth the compassion. Because if they didn't do it, we'd be merrily going along and closing our eyes to a lot of things. Doesn't mean they're not going on.
Oh,
So
yeah, we're
I
playing
think it's
that
a,
dance, the good guy and the bad guy to help us evolve. We're
oh,
all here to
yes,
evolve
we've got
together.
that one.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
for sure. Okay, let's do this last one and then we'll go on to something else. Again, to everybody who's listening, the book is Myths of Choice, and she goes through 8 of these myths. And this last one is one
Yes.
of my favorites, the myth that you can't change, that you're fixed,
Yes.
that we're fixed and certain choices, earlier choices negate future change. I think that one really plagues our
Yeah.
society and most of us
Yeah.
individually.
I think you're right. And you said it earlier. We've always done it like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've
I'm too old to
always we've
change.
always eaten meat. We've always had war. We've always had boundaries. We've always, these people have always been good, these people have always been
Yeah.
bad, whatever it is.
That's right. It's that sort of fixed thing. So, but ultimately underneath it is, what can I do? I can't do anything, and it's a relinquishing of responsibility. Now, at that sort of global level we're looking, but also in our community, when people go, "God, I can't believe so and so did this," it's just typical, isn't it? And I said, I don't live in that world. What was it that made that person choose that at that time? What We don't know anything about their life and what's going on for them. And I'm not saying the behavior is then justified. They have to be accountable, but it might give some pointers as to why they behave badly in that way. And I think this is it, but we can only do that when we're truthful with ourselves and we're boundaried and accountable for our actions as well. I always say to people, whenever you see a problem, you're always there, but ask yourself, anything you're unhappy with is, what is my part in creating this? You know, what am I, what am I creating here? So at the personal level, I don't believe I can change is, I guess for the listener and all of us, myself included, is asking ourselves, what is it that I deny I can change? Um, I could never move house. I'm too old. I'm really established here now. You'd love to have my one. Gosh, I've really created a wonderful garden where I'm growing things, so I wouldn't want to move now. And I think it's the difference between examining these. It doesn't mean you have to throw everything out and be valueless, which doesn't actually exist. Notice we're choosing not to choose often, but is asking ourselves, where am I denying I have choice, or I can't see where it's available? So if I say, oh, there's nothing in my community that is aligned, there's nobody here that I feel aligned with. And I say, what if there was someone out there who's asking the same question and they don't know you're here asking this question? Maybe is, what about you? You're saying there's no groups here. Oh, you have to create one. And then when you stand up, people go, oh my gosh, I'll come to that. And I think this is the wonderful thing. We have choice in our world. I live in Queens, Australia, and there's a lovely small town near me. And I'm a gardener and I love gardening. And everyone's saying, well, the state of the earth, everyone's spraying things, it's all mass produced. And I said, well, not in my world. Um, I don't do that. And so I've been saving seeds. And then I go to the library and I ask them, do you know anyone who does seed saving? Oh, we do. Oh, you just bring your things in and we have to fill them in. And I said, well, I've got quite a few here. I've got 50 seeds. Oh, no, it goes to a central thing in this other town and we distribute it and it goes through all these different groups. And that, to me, somebody started that. I had the idea that I wanted to do it and I can contribute. And we think something small can't make a difference. I could have said, well, not many people around here sort of don't seem to take these growing healthy food very seriously. Who am I to say that? It's just that I have not done the work to find it. When we start doing it, we actually realize it comes back to us.
Yeah, I love the way your mind works. I really do. I love the way your mind works. And I think that you're really sharing what we could each do. And this thing that we get stuck in, we get so stuck in just complaining about the world, being
Yeah.
upset with it, and feeling we have no agency. And all of these things are happening to us. And I am victimized in this way. And that it is a place of so much just lack of hope and really actually no agency when you actually have agency because you can make new choices. You can create a life where you are empowered. And there's this thing I get again, it's a cultural thing, and I think it's a conditioning thing that we all kind of sit around the water cooler and talk about how bad things are. It's like you got to shake it up, make it happen, and you do that with your garden and your seeds.
And I think so. The first thing about taking responsibility is to constantly, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? What are you doing? It starts raining. And many people, oh, look at the weather. I was brought up by a father that went, oh, fantastic. It's raining, beautiful for the garden. You know, and it's just weather. Say that too in a drought zone. People have rain dances in California. It's really, we are relinquishing our responsibility to the fact it's overcast. How lovely. It's a bit cooler today in Australia. Wonderful. Um, and I think this is it. So ask ourselves, where are we, you know, going into a shop and a young person's dismissive, or God, despair for the youth of today, someone might say, you know, as opposed to talking to that person. Young people don't talk to people, they don't talk to the customer. Isn't it terrible? As opposed to looking the person in the eye and going, hey, how long have you been here? And start to engage them, as opposed to saying, isn't technology awful? They're all on their phones. Let's change, because all of us have examples of real change happens is through a conversation we weren't expecting. Someone said something. And I'll give you a quick story, if I may, if that's
Sure.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I in the 1990s, I was working in a British university, and we got involved in open learning, which was traveling to many different countries. And I had a wonderful opportunity to work in the Ukraine and Israel and China and Taiwan and the Middle East, an open learning, and using the university's certificates, diplomas, and degrees, and doing whatever. And I happened to work in Israel. Okay. And I was, say, working with the military and certainly not teaching them or any other country to do bad things, but teaching them, because if they got a qualification, a post-grad qualification, their salaries went up 30%. And so you can imagine some of the senior people we had in those classes. It was I've got lots of funny stories. But I remember being in a taxi, and I was single, living in London in my late 30s, it would be. And I'd been in partnership before, and I was sort of, I wanted to be independent, and I was successful in this organizational psychology career. And this lovely taxi driver, our stories are so important. I'm in the back of the taxi, he's taking me to another meeting that I'm going to be standing on the stage with these senior people. And he asked me, hey, look, you got any children? Are you married? I said, no, I'm not, and whatever. He said, how come? I said, well, I just focused on this. There's the normal stories and excuses and choices. And he said, let me tell you a story. He said, because we could be slaves to our freedom. He said, Claire, there's a wonderful book. I checked it out. It was an Italian book, I think, called The Late Mr. Pascali. Mr. Pascali was a very boring man, apparently. He was a librarian, but very stuck. And so he had this job all his life. And this taxi driver is telling me that Mr. Pascali wakes up every day. He he wears the same sort of outfit. He has the same breakfast. He leaves at 10 to 9 in the morning, kisses his wife on the cheek, tells his children to have a nice day at school, grabs his umbrella. You can see the thing. He does everything. And the day continues like that, where he has his coffee at 5 to 11. He then has his lunch at 12:15, has the same lunch, sits in the same place. You can just see this from dawn to dusk. His life is very pedestrian and very controlled. One day, Mr. Pascali, the taxi driver, is telling me, and there is a book on this, he was reading in the newspaper that he had died and that his body had floated down the river. Mr. Pascali's eating his lunch. He always read the paper. And he looked around and said, oh my gosh, nobody knows I'm dead. This is my opportunity to be free, to recreate something new. So this taxi driver is telling me the story. And he said, and he's floated down there. So Mr. Pascali leaves the library, leaves his family, leaves his life, and he goes on the road, and he's having all these wonderful adventures around the world. Every time he starts to get involved with a little group or a connection or a friend, he goes, no, I know the path I'll go down. I want my freedom. That will take away my freedom. And so one day he's crossing the road, and there's a little puppy in the road, and he saves the puppy and moves him to the side. And the puppy's very vulnerable, and the puppy needs his help. And as he moves towards the puppy, he goes, no, I can't, because it will be a commitment. My freedom will be lost. Oh my goodness. So he walks away from the puppy. And then this enormous sadness comes across him. And he went, oh my gosh, I'm not free at all. He said, I'm a slave to my freedom.
Mm.
And so the taxi driver said to me, do you know, Claire, we're all in chains. but the real freedom is getting to choose your own chains. He said, but knowing what change you do. And he said, maybe you need to re-examine your life. And maybe you've got this identity myth of this career woman, this successful, independent woman living in London. And maybe that doesn't serve you anymore. Just ask yourself the question. Now, what a teacher that guy was.
That's
What an
amazing.
amazing guy. Amazing, because it did liberate me. We're a slave to our freedom. So freedom isn't being without commitments, responsibilities, um, accountability to others, and compromise. But it's knowing that we're choosing that, as opposed to saying, well, everybody does that because that's what you do when you're married, or you're a parent, or you're this, or whatever, or my blood type, or we've always eaten this. And so I think it's for each of us, ask ourselves, what are the stories that changed our lives? What were those moments? Facts alone don't change people. It's how we feel. And we are all teachers and students of each other. So we need to tell stories and encourage people in their growth. Who would have known that taxi driver is now helping me in the work I'm doing, helping vegans to be nicer people, because I think vegans could do with being a bit nicer towards other human animals, many of them, and other vegans that aren't vegan enough.
Yes.
It's
Yeah, we know
or in the
we know
mind.
the spectrum. I love that
We know
story.
the
I
bunch.
think for so many reasons I love that story, but the idea that wisdom comes in places that's not often expected, you know? And I
Yeah.
do think taxi drivers can be extremely wise guides.
No, it was so lovely. I could still see him now. And he didn't push, he laid the feast out in front of me. And I think that's what we can do, is through our life's work, is each of us lay the feast out in front of people, of the leap ahead about the possibility for them, because that is changing the world. Because if each person steps up, we would examine different areas of where are we causing harm. And we cannot relinquish and say, oh, but we've always done that.
Mhm.
Because once we know we are culpable in it, we don't have to wait for the whole world to change. We change our world, and then we become an invitation for change.
Well, I think those are fabulous closing words, but you may have other closing words that you want to add. I just want to make sure that everything is said here that you want to say. But I do think that's a really
Mm.
great place to generally end. And if you have more to say before you say it, I just I just have to wonder about that taxi driver and how many lives he's affected. That gentleman, he affected you so much, and now he's affecting me and everybody who's listening. And how many people did he tell that story or another story to in his cab in such a generous
Right.
way? Because obviously he wasn't lecturing, and you had a generous listening. But I think it's
Yes.
marvelous to think that there's this soul that was in a taxi. Israel? Was it Israel? Is that what you said?
Well, it was in Israel, and
Yeah.
I know we've got to finish, but if I may just add
Yeah.
a little balance here. When I worked in the Middle East, I was teaching in courses from Britain, management courses, and now I cringe in oil companies and everything else.
Oh, I worked for an oil company.
Sorry,
I worked for an
sorry,
oil
say.
company for 20 years.
Well, there you go. Exactly. I say I cringe, but in the sense of any corporate, if I'm on it,
Yeah.
of blind capitalism. I'm not talking about producing services and products that benefit us all. It's the blind
Yeah.
adherence to profit at any cost that I have a
Yeah.
problem. And most people do have a problem with that, really. But I was in a class, and then in the lunchtime, this very staunch Muslim chap was telling me about the benefits of Islam, and he's going on. And this very wise old Emirati man tapped him on the shoulder and he said, young man, there are many roads to Abu Dhabi. And I always remember that. There's another story. So you've got different, in theory, how we're told they're different ends of the spectrum, which I don't believe they are. This is millennia old, and we need to distinguish, move this stuff out of real people involved. Is there's his wisdom, young man. There's many roads to Abu Dhabi. He was really talking about a spiritual path,
Uh-huh.
that you can call it what you like, but the principles are the same.
Yes, it is true. That is very, very true. Claire, this has been so fun. Like I said, I love your mind. I love your existential inquiry and your questioning of everything. And it's really a really great example for how so many of us can can choose to live our lives. Is there anything else that you would like to share that you didn't get a chance to share?
Probably not, except to I hope this has been inspiration, and thank you so much for your work. And everybody listening is, you know, we are the ones we've been waiting for. It doesn't matter. You may not feel you're on the world stage, you're not on Carol's wonderful podcast or whatever, but each of us have a path to play with our neighbor in our community. And I invite people if they, I do work with people to further, particularly around veganism, of course, is if we want a conversation, we can have a conversation, please. Mm.
Yeah, and we'll have all your links to your work and your books and everything on the show notes. This has been such an enlightening episode and definitely one of hope, inspiration, and awakening for everyone, which is basically the theme of my podcast. So I think you offer all three to everyone. So thank you so much for
Thank
sharing everything and your wonderful book. It really gets you to think about how to make choices and the stuckness that we're in sometimes and that we create our own lives. So let's go out and create a beautiful world, a compassionate one.
Do you know, it ends so beautifully on there, but you asked me if I wanted, and I'd like to always thank my parents. My father spent the first all my childhood seeking the truth. He went through different religions, different spiritual paths, and helped me to inquire. I struggled with it at the time when I was younger, and now I can see it's all come together. So sometimes good things happen and bad things happen, and often it's not till later we get to decide which is which.
Oh, thank you. That's beautiful. He sounds like a wonderful man. So thank you again, Claire. And I'll have you on again. We'll talk about, we can keep talking another couple hours. I'm sure I'll have you on again. And thank you everyone for listening. I now close the spiritual forum. Thanks for listening. If you like what you've heard here, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment, or a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. You can also sign up for my weekly newsletter or make a donation to support this work at thespiritualforum.org. Tune in every week and remember, you are a divine creation, perfect and whole, just as you are.